do that zone thing there. Here, I'll set this up so I can see it. Okay. Is that in the frame right there?
Yes.
You're good.
All right, so hi everybody, my name is Hannah Simpson. My pronouns are she and her. I am a volunteer in the Greater New York chapter, and so I'm gonna take some privilege as a New Yorker to talk fast and act like I know what I'm talking about and let you be the judge. All right, this is a little bit of me in the Red Cross when I was in Hurricane Harvey. So we're gonna be talking about gender identity in disaster, and this is kind of a 101, 102 on trans identity, and also bringing it into the Red Cross all at once, because I don't think you can understand the issues facing us being in the Red Cross as trans people and non-binary and agender people, but unless you understand the entire climate that's going on around us in this country at the time. So it's everything kind of combined, and there might be a little time for questions at the end, or otherwise ask me, I'll be here the rest of the day. So again, plan for today, roughly 20-25 minutes. Feel free to interrupt if you think I'm going a bit too fast or there's something you don't understand. We're gonna go through some disclaimers, an introduction to some terminology, some best practices, and if there's time, some thought cases as well. And so a couple disclaimers again. I want us to always think about the Red Cross fundamental principles, because there's a big difference between things in our country which are political and things which are politicized. A great example of that is climate change. A lot of what we do is based on a strong possibility that the climate is changing, and a lot of our plans for the future might want to be based on that when we think about the responses we're going to be doing. Now, can we have an official opinion on climate change? That's a question. Can our fundamental principles clash with one another? Can being in favor of humanity affect our neutrality, our independence, etc.? These are the questions that I'm going to ask you to ask. I am on the Red Cross Pride Steering Committee, so this content is of course evolving, but one thing that's really important to me is that you hear this kind of story from a person who identifies as trans or non-binary. This is a conversation that's really easy to have when nobody's in the room, because you can say whatever you want to, but if you're saying something to me, it's a little different. And also it gives me the chance to be your example, because the hypothetical that others want to paint about what a trans person is maybe doesn't align to what you see in front of you. And I want you to think about that. And this is also, of course, based on my experiences. You see one trans person, you've met one trans person. I am a volunteer at the Red Cross, and I am a transgender woman, as I've mentioned. And when I use pictures here, they are public figures, most of whom I know. And otherwise, I have their permissions. Just be advised about that. So a little bit about me. I've done 4 deployments in disaster integration. I actually came to the Red Cross backwards from most people. I was stranded in Austin giving a talk at the Austin Interfaith Pride. I was the keynote speaker in a sermon, and then Pride was gonna be that weekend until it got rained out by Hurricane Harvey, as was my flight. I was bored, so I was like, oh, the Red Cross is looking for people. I'm gonna go do that. I was in a shelter within 3 hours of my showing up at the chapter office in Central and South Texas. I was there for 30 hours straight. And then I had so much fun that I stayed for 3.5 weeks and became a deployed volunteer to Houston from Austin, came back to New York and like, hi, I'm a volunteer just getting back from deployment. And they're like, who are you? So that was really interesting and not the usual way that it goes. I am a nationally known speaker and commentator on trans identity, and I am exceptionally lucky. I had parents that accepted me unconditionally. They were perplexed, but they went through it with me together. I can't say that everyone has that experience. You can see me there. That's my brother's high school and then college graduation, and there's a little difference in the person that's on his side there, or an evolution, I would say. Some pictures of me on the news out of the New York market, on some national television, me giving some national speeches, and I got the transgender flag colors on the tallest building in our country. I want to mention that time I was on The Daily Show, not to humble brag, but because it was filmed right here at Survival Systems in Groton, Connecticut. So if you've ever been there by the Naval Yard, it's a really cool facility where they teach you how to safely escape helicopters and airplanes.
Oh, everybody's like, we gotta do this.
Also, just let me know when I've gone 10 minutes, 20 minutes, and gone. So terminology, what is transgender? Okay, so this is actually the Red Cross Volunteer Connection here, if you can see it. So you have the option of selecting male, female, or transgender for your gender marker option at the moment, which is maybe one way to look at it, maybe not the best way. And this is my friend Rebecca, actually. And I just love that sign. So in short, it's anyone whose own perception of their gender identity differs from what was assigned or appears outwardly, at least at first, and then they might evolve into that. And it's an umbrella term. It can include people who are gender nonconforming and people who are within the gender binaries alike. So I identify as a woman, and so I am a trans woman. That's how I got to being a woman, but I am relatively binarily identified, whereas other people may not be. So I want to do a simple exercise with everybody. If you want to just pretend you have a pen in your hand, or you can grab one off the table. And I just want everyone to write their name. Mime it if you want to. Now really quickly, before you start doing it too long, put that pen in the other hand, okay? Now try writing your name. How does it feel? And how long did it take you to realize that? So that's kind of how I figured out my gender identity. It was a lot like my handedness, and I figured it out around the same time and age. And it was kind of like, you know, you could always be slapped if we had a perception in this world that you had to be right-handed, and if you were lefty, they would take that pen out of your hand and put it in the right hand, and people learned to manage with that, but it always didn't feel right for those people. Now, it's still you, the best you, you know, it's still you doing all the writing, either way, but it's not the best you can be. And what you realize over time is that the left-handedness for you can be as true as the right-handedness for me. Or we can think about a society where not everyone has one or two hands to work with. Or people can use different hands in different ways. And that's where you can be binary, you can be non-binary, you can be fluid, or you can be without, and we are all equal and need to be considered. And I think that's really important to mention. So gender identity versus one's orientation. So the T compared to the LGB. So orientation is who you're attracted to. Gender identity is who you are. And you're still straight if you date a trans person who is the gender you normally date. Or you're still gay if you date a trans person who is the gender that you normally date. This is my now ex, Adi, actually. And who's trans in that picture? Well, actually, both of us. But, you know, by all accounts, we were a straight couple. And he comes up a couple times in this because he's a really sweet guy, and you'll learn more about him in a second. So, is trans identity new? That's one thing you're going to hear a lot. This is all new. Well, it's a new conversation because in the media, once the gay marriage thing was settled, they had to jump the shark and come up with something new to talk about. And trans was waiting there in the wings. But this is a page here. This is actually the correct page from the Jewish Mishnah Talmud, which characterized 6 sexes. So a masculine, a feminine, a masculine that appears masculine until puberty, and then becomes more feminine looking, vice versa, feminine and then masculine, one called androgynous and one called tumtum, which meant they didn't really know. And so the Talmud is kind of like ancient Reddit. It was literally the scholarly message board of all the cool things that the sages saw in the world, and they wrote letters to each other, and there was some great conversations, and there were some trolls. But they were having a conversation about how do we include people, which is pretty profound for 1800 years ago. Furthermore, many, if not all, indigenous cultures in North America and around the world have respected and revered two-spirit identities, and they call them different things as well. And in the USA, there's an estimated 1.4 million adults who identify as transgender. So what is new? Of course, the modern era from the Stonewall riot and Sylvia Rivera, Marsha P. Johnson, and the trans women of color and the other activists who were standing up to the police riots, saying that we couldn't congregate in Lower Manhattan and just be ourselves out in public. Obviously, from the 1910s to present for trans people, there was actual medical intervention. And of course, very recently, of course, the standards of care, the clinics, and insurance coverage. The 2000s I mentioned with digital cameras and YouTube, because that's what got me coming out. I came out in college because I didn't see, or after college actually, because I didn't see a lot of examples of myself out there in the media, because I never took pictures of myself. It was a film camera growing up. Any of you remember film cameras? Somebody had to develop those pictures. So me wearing my sister's dresses and taking that to the Photoshop and getting it back in an hour would have raised some eyebrows. And so digital cameras, we have more control, and of course we all take pics we don't want anybody to see. And those are, just part of the freedom we have now, but then at the same time, we can post them so much more readily. So you see on YouTube, all these people montaging their transitions, not just showing you an isolated 56K modem upload of one picture, but now a whole plethora of this is what it looks like to do this. And I was like, wow, I can do this too. And of course, with everything comes the systemic attacks and violence against trans identity. So some other terminology, and this is to rebut against the conversation we had earlier about what is transgender on the Red Cross page. Transgender is not itself a gender. Transgender can be a term that includes many things. It can include non-binary, and NB is kind of a word that stands for NB from non-binary. So it's kind of a fun word. Genderqueer, agender, someone who doesn't express any gender. Intersex is an interesting question because it's the people who more physically, outwardly exhibit characteristics of both genders, either immediately at birth or later in life. And it's important to remember that not all intersex people have the experience of transitioning, and also not all transgender people are physically determined to be intersex throughout their lives either. So there's a lot of overlap with these terms. Transition, of course, is the act of, through medical or social exercise, taking on a new gender role. And passing is a word that I really don't like. It implies, the alternative is failure to look stereotypically within the bell curve of your intended gender. And on the other hand, I have a lot of privilege that I possibly do pass in many situations. Other terms you might have heard of: cisgender, people who are not transgender, kind of like heterosexual is to homosexual for orientation. Bisexual and pansexual are those orientation terms for people who are attracted to genders that are like and unlike themselves. So you ask, how can you be bi if there's many, many genders? Well, it's different and the same from you. How many political parties are there in this country? Lots. How many make a lot of noise? Gender's the same way. Two make a lot of noise and try to say that you're either us or you're not, and the rest struggle to remind you they exist. Queer is a term that within the community has really been, with effort, reclaimed to say that if you're using it with positive intention and not as a slur, it's become a catch-all, as well as LGBTQIA+, and the other acronyms you might have seen. And gender expression is aligned, of course, with gender identity, in that it can be fluid and it can vary, but it can also apply to how stereotypically masculine or feminine or not you express yourself within a gender that might even be the one you were assigned at birth. There are women who express themselves very femininely, and I might be on that side of the curve, and there are women who express themselves more butch, they might say. Important guidelines. It's an adjective, not a noun. So it's a transgender person, a transgender individual, a trans woman. There's no ED in it. It's never transgendered. Everyone is real, so there's no such thing as a transgender woman and a real woman. They're all real women or real men. There are obsolete terms like transsexual and a slur like tranny. Please don't use those, and I don't want to spend more time on those right now. And again, humanity from the Red Cross fundamental principles is we accept everyone as they are. One last thing about terminology. Things that don't matter to the American Red Cross in what we do. Biological sex. Surgery, medical, or even your trans status at all. there's nothing that it actually matters to that we do. Sexual orientation, other than when it becomes apparent through one's family structure that, oh, this is my husband, or this is my wife, this is my partner, these are our children. We don't pull anybody's pants down, and I, looking around the room, don't think we want to. We also don't ask for any ID, and I love that. And it's really important to remember for our blood collection guidelines that gender is self-identified. So what does being trans look like? So look at some of these women here, and this is gonna scroll through. It's a little choppier than I like it to be, but see any potential volunteers here? Some really beautiful people. So this is actually a montage from Unerased, GLAAD Award-winning piece by Meredith Toulousan, a friend of mine and their team. They use they and them pronouns. Each of these people is a trans person murdered from 2010 to 2018. The blank spaces were where no photo was available. These are only the murdered, not to mention those who've had violent attacks and survived. And of course, their demographics are listed on the site, and also the way they died, which is often tremendously brutal. People were beaten, shot, run over, left to die. In Harlem, not long before I moved, there was a trans woman left for dead. Her mother had to take her off the respirator a week later at Harlem Hospital. And this was only a couple of months after they had reconciled and she was beginning a new life, effectively. And then it was taken away, just because somebody thought, wow, I'm being fooled by you just by walking down the street and seeing you and thinking you're a pretty girl and hitting on you. And of course, many more go unreported. So some statistics, I'll let you read these for a second. And the bold is the important part, but that 40% you've heard about of respondents who have attempted suicide at some point in their life, this is the study that it came from, of transgender people throughout this country, and that's compared to 4.6% of the general US population. So I'll move on now. This is from NBC News talking about transgender students. They surveyed almost 4,000 of them and found 26% reported being sexually assaulted in the previous 12 months. So, I hate to use this term lightly, but there are some warped realities of what trans people are in this country. And these are the biggest threats to any transgender person, are the hatred and the false perceptions. So trans people are believed by some people to be a boutique, fringe, or at least an adult issue. Oh, well, just don't involve my kids in this. You know, this is what adults have to figure out for themselves. Well, no. There are people coming out at 5, 6, 7 years old, really bravely saying, this is who I am, and not being equivocal about it. And the perception that when you're young, that we're just making you be whatever you are and giving you these irreversible, life-altering changes. No, most of it's social when you are younger. And only as you grow up and you begin to develop the ability to comprehend and understand what you're doing, do the larger interventions take place. And all of this is through tremendous medical supervision. You know, a rabbi asked me in my community, you know, if my son says, Abba, Papa, I want to be a girl, do I just make him a girl? I said, Rabbi, somebody comes to you and says, I want to be a Jew. Do you just make that person a Jew? No, there's a process. And it starts out very social, and you know, by the end, at least it doesn't involve surgery if you're becoming a Jew. Oh, wait. We can agree that's nobody's business. And that's the best analogy for it. Of course, a lifestyle choice that someone can approve or not, a deception, that trans panic defense that I've talked about. People think, oh, I'm dating somebody, they tell me I'm trans, and I have a right to lash out and murder them. But that's been used in court many times, that it's a contagious thing. They call us transgenders, that I'm going to make one of you in this room trans. Who's the lucky person? I'll tell you later, it's under your seat. That it's fixable through prayer, therapy, or by threat of violence, that it's an undue expense on society, and of course that it's perverted, predatory, a threat to privacy, of other individuals. So, actor Michael Urie at the Met Gala earlier this year. This was a Hattie Mae and Medea impersonator who came to the Austin shelter. And of course, everyone had a blast with this, individual coming through and just saying, hey, I want to entertain people and have some fun here in Austin. And this is Mike Huckabee, who was a presidential candidate. And let's see if we can hear what he has to say.
We are now in city after city watching ordinances that say that your 7-year-old daughter, if she goes into the restroom, cannot be offended, and you can't be offended if she's greeted there by a 42-year-old man who feels more like a woman than he does a man. Now, I wish someone had told me when I was in high school that I could have felt like a woman when it came time to take showers in PE. I'm pretty sure I would have found my feminine side and said, Coach, I think I'd rather shower with the girls today.
That's it anyway. It's over now.
For later.
Well, that's the last one. So that's what trans people are up against. But on the other hand, we are fiercer than ever. This is my friend Nikki here, who's Dreamer in the CW series Supergirl, and she's amazing. We have a trans superhero now on public television, or on a broadcast network, not public television, broadcast network. It's pretty cool. The cast of Pose, Danica Rome, our first but not last, and actually not only now, openly trans elected state legislator down in Virginia in their House of Delegates. And up there, I love this picture. That's Nikki Aragos-Lloyd in Houston, Texas, who is an amazing trans activist in her own right? And this is her on the night of Hurricane Harvey in Houston, being part of the Cajun Navy, or whatever you choose to call it, literally rescuing people out of their homes that flash flooded down the block from her own on her jet ski with her husband. So when a trans person reaches their arm out to you and says, "Get on my jet ski," I think it's a really interesting point that a lot of transphobia fades away. And that's Adi again with his father Amir. And what I really love about this photo is that Adi and Amir are a father and son team on our sister organization in Israel, Magen David Adom. They actually do ambulance first response in Israel along with disaster planning and response. So it's a little more broader in scope than what we do here in the American Red Cross. But it's really cool that as trans people, if we're not fighting for our own lives, we can be out there with our families, literally fighting for other people's lives. And I just want to zoom in a little bit really quickly on Amir's name badge there. He's sporting something kind of special right there. It's this that I'm pointing to.
What is it? It's our pin.
That is our Red Cross Celebrating Diversity pin, which is now circulating around in Greater Tel Aviv. And it's really cool to wear for him because it's, again, we are their sister organization here in America. And of course, the cast of Pose on the FX network, this amazing show that rocked all the Emmys. They were the Grand Marshals of the New York City Pride, World Pride this year, and just a fantastic portrait into trans identity growing up through the last few decades. So, when disaster strikes, so now you've got this big overview of trans identity as a whole. What does this mean for people when it comes time that they have to leave their homes because they are not safe to stay in? Well, you're less likely to have robust family support, if any. You're less likely to have stable housing and employment. You're less likely, and again, I'm speaking broadly, not for any specific individuals, to feel comfortable in an unfamiliar environment. So there's more exposure, more potential scrutiny from other people in the shelter. There's the ID and name considerations. Even if we're not asking for ID, there might be other organizations at the facility that are. There's the layered marginalizations, considering race, access and functional needs, spoken and signed languages you speak or communicate in, documentation status, which as we know are all considerations that we deal with as challenges on a daily basis. Concern over laws like North Carolina's House Bill 2 that tried to regulate restroom use. Concern about the views of the partnering organizations that we team up with. And all of this equals people who are potential clients that are more likely to benefit from, yet less likely to access Red Cross services. So some best practices in a disaster. I'm part of the disability integration team, as I said, and one thing I noticed when we were setting up the sink basins, that the accessible sink wasn't always put in a place that was very accessible. And so these things are a pain to move once they are filled with 50 gallons or more of water, or 100 gallons, whatever they hold. So you really have to get there in the beginning and lay the groundwork, and I think that's a great example for what we can do as an organization. So ask people's pronouns. It's never an inappropriate question to say, what pronouns do you like to use? I use she and her. The best time to ask is as or right after you've offered your own. Create that space where someone says, okay, maybe I'm presenting in a way where I want you to ask that question, or I know that it might get asked. And if it goes over the person's head, they're like, what's the pronoun? Then you know your answer. It means take your best guess, and they're probably not trying to be as subversive to the gender norms as you thought they might be. What if you mess up? Quickly move on. Don't dwell on it, don't apologize other than just saying sorry, whoops, and try to make the correct address to that person or about that person in the future. Calling out a trans person's incorrect gender or their old name is kind of like calling out the name of your last partner while you are dating your current partner. It's human, it happens, but we can all imagine nothing good comes from it. And it can be hurtful whether we intend it to be or not. Bathrooms, showers, separated areas. Unlike Governor Huckabee, we have to uphold the humanity of all of our individual clients. And remember that someone being does not have to not be for other people to be satisfied. If this was looking back at segregation and the racial segregation that we had in this country, and we look at it today and say that's kind of absurd, that if someone objected to using a bathroom when a person of a different race was in the room, we would say that's really on you. We're not going to tell that person that they can't use this restroom or can only use it at certain times or have to stay in another place because that's your concern. Here, if we have the option to offer it, is this beautiful, gender-neutral, race-neutral, single-stall restroom that we can offer you if this is a concern, but also offer it to anybody who does identify as non-binary or who does need a little extra privacy or a little extra time and space or has a family to properly take care of their hygiene needs. This is a great place where trailers can come in as well, and where we can create spaces where everyone feels welcome and everyone can also have an opportunity to have their biases in a private space if that's what they really choose to, but we need to set an example from the front end. Signage in our language, like are we saying ladies and gentlemen to people? Is that covering everyone who's possibly in the room? Can we say hello friends, good morning clients? Maybe we have to think about that a little bit, but how can we add in everybody in the way that we think about approaching the group? Children's activities. Trans people can be around children. That's one of the biggest mythologies, that someone says, oh, well, this is an adult issue. Don't be thinking about it till they're 18. I don't want to teach them about it. It's very hard for us as the Red Cross. We're not there to give people, sex ed and get into the details, but the idea that we can say this person identifies as so-and-so, please be respectful, that's something we can say. We don't have to give them everything, but we can give age-appropriate acknowledgement of what reality is and let kids soak that in as they do, because kids soak in all kinds of reality. And that's beautiful. That's what we expect them to do, and we hope that they will do. So again, to each person, offer what they need. And of course, privacy and outing individuals is a big, big, big concern, and there's so many places where this can happen by de facto, even if it doesn't happen by intent. And it's important to remember that it's not our story to tell about somebody else's trans status. So if a client comes to you and says, is so-and-so trans? You can say, I'm not in a place to discuss that. This is this client, this is her name or his name, or I don't know this client, and it's not really important for me to be getting into this, but how can I help you otherwise? Change the subject, get to a yes, do everything that we can to remind people that there's a lot of things in the Red Cross that we do need to ask about as people come in for the safety of themselves and for other clients. This is not one of them. Of course, a trans person could be tangentially in any other category that we have, whether it's someone who has additional health issues, whether it's someone who has sensory or access and functional needs, or has a different ability level that we have to attend to. So that's an overlapping thing. Like I said, there's layers within this, and it just adds another one that can make things more complicated. So the really hard stuff, these are the challenges ahead. And now I haven't mentioned it yet, but it's important to mention that I, standing here today at the U.S. Coast Guard Academy, could not apply to this college. I could not enlist in the Coast Guard. I could not be drafted into the Coast Guard. I did fill out selective service. I could not serve openly in the Coast Guard. I could not come out in the Coast Guard at risk of my career and everything that I had built up to this point. And yet I'm standing here today. It's kind of strange. But as we think about our service to the armed forces and the discrimination that's going on, it begs a question. Again, 15,000 active duty service members are at risk, and over 150,000 veterans who identify as trans and non-binary are also possibly at risk of having their benefits taken away. Just check the time, how we're doing. Almost done. Blood. So the men who have sex with men, MSM regulations by the FDA, are obsolete. I think we can say that to the least. But they are set by the FDA, yet the American Red Cross is often faulted for them. And that affects our brand image. So we need to be thinking about how we are not only distancing ourselves, but being a voice for it will help us best serve the community with the best possible supply of the most possible blood to have the most possible eligible donors. How do we make that happen? Without advocating for a policy, simply stating blanketly in humanity, we need to get more blood. How can we engage more donors? Is this something we can reevaluate? Again, the municipalities and the states that we think about, the bathroom bills, etc., are partnering organization and facility stances. So if we go to, say, a religious facility and they have flyers on the wall for reparative therapy, and we're about to open a 500-bed shelter, is that a place that we can comfortably set up a shelter? And that's something we have to think about. It might be really convenient. They might have a kitchen space where we can set up a galley or a mess like this. They might have all kinds of room for beds and all kinds of room for staff shelters and cots as well. But maybe we have to think about that. Religious freedom provisions. Okay, that's my time almost. I've got like 2 more minutes. Oh, maybe it's not. 5 minutes, okay. This one really takes us back to the American Red Cross principles, takes us back to the history of the Red Cross. Because we and the Geneva Conventions that spawned us and that we helped draft are really important here. We think about there are people in this country working to make it possible for anyone to say that they do not want to engage with or treat as a doctor or serve a transgender person or a person who's had an abortion or a person who might be gay, that they suspect, forget about what they actually are, and that would be defined as a religious freedom to opt out and be legally protected within their employment status in any number of organizations that engage with the federal government, and we're probably one of them. And it's really fascinating because on those fields of Solferino, who did the early Red Crossers and our predecessors, who did they treat? Everyone. And if you're in a military and you're a medic, who do you treat? Including the person who just was shooting at you. You serve them. And to think that even in 2 different contexts, that a person who is gender diverse or might be gay or has other parts of their life that someone feels objectionable is at a lower level in terms of their ability to access care than someone who was just shooting at you is baffling. So this is what I want to leave you with basically, which is what do our fundamental principles, humanity, impartiality, neutrality, independence, voluntary service, universality, and unity, and the other one, what do they look like in the 21st century? So this is some of our service members who went to the last State of the Union address, and I believe there is someone there representing the United States Coast Guard. I want to say Army, Air Force, Navy, Coast Guard, and Marines. And this is me in Greater New York. Somebody's getting trans blood. I think that's really important to mention that, you know, your blood might be coming from a trans person. Your blood might be going to a trans person or a gay person. And I think that's really cool that blood just kind of doesn't know where it's going or where it's coming from. It's just blood and it saves lives. And that's really cool. It brings us all together. So just a little bit of blue skies when we change gray skies. So what can the Red Cross do? Can we be a cultural influencer? Without necessarily saying this is what our policies should be, can we lead by example? And can we leverage our size, our age, our presence, and the respect that we've garnered over 150 years? Which new organizations can we partner with? What new volunteers can we tap? And how can we be more visible? It was a little important in Texas to just kind of find a way. Because they had just come over the whole idea of the bathroom bills themselves, which thankfully they didn't pass. And just to remind you again to finish, our identities don't just wash away in heavy rains or high water. They might literally be all we have left. So with that, thank you. I do have, if we have a minute, we have some time for questions. I'm gonna skip these cases for thought right now. And this is my information here. Anybody wanna ask a question or do a thought exercise, or are we good on time?
We're a little short on time.
Okay.
I do want to say thank you for being here, and I guess I want to point out to everybody that has a volunteer who is fighting so hard to help us all achieve what everybody in this room and every volunteer is trying to do, which is to meet our mission, which is to help people who need help. And thank you so much for that. You know, there's a little thing I read in your bio. You mentioned you came into the Red Cross backwards, and I don't know if you talk about this, but for me, I mean, it kind of tied into one of the things that we were talking about before this, which is you went to the Red Cross, said I want to volunteer, and they said we're busy, our classes are full, come back later, which is, of course, I mean, think of any context to say that. That's a terrible way to greet people who want to help. But you didn't just walk away, which is we're thankful for. You went back to the back door and said, what can I do to help? And you ran into people who needed some immediate help, and you started helping. So thank you for what you did then, thank you for pushing, and thank you for continuing to help to try and help us deliver our mission better. So hopefully that's okay. Does anybody have any questions for Hannah before we move on? It's, you know, like I said, it's the curse for today, which is we have so little time to cover so much. But yeah, Cecilia.
Hannah, thank you so much for this informative, impactful presentation. My questions are, how many transgenders do we have here at the Red Cross, or what are we doing to recruit and reach out to gain more transgenders to join our organization?
So how many transgender people, it's not typical to use the term transgenders, just so you know, that we have. I honestly don't know, and it's important to remember that not everyone might be out about their trans status. There's people who've transitioned, especially earlier in life, and don't want to make it a major part of their identity. To me, it's really important. In my business card that I'll hand out later, I tell people that not hiding my past might help somebody else to stop hiding their future. I think that representation matters. I know of a few personally. I've encountered people in the community when I've been in different deployments, and it's always fun to meet someone else. I've encountered people in the shelter system as clients, and it's great to be a resource to say, hey, you're not alone.
Yeah.
Hey, someone here is gonna respect you, look out for you. And how do we engage more people? I think it's being out there, it's working with the different partnering organizations all across the country that are involved in the LGBT community and saying, hey, we want to start these alliances. It may not happen overnight, but it's about building those foundations. And it's about having conversations like this one. I have an Etsy shop. I sell pins. I'm also looking for a new career advancement, so you can put my name on the third sheet there. But it's really cool that I had a bunch of pins with me when I was gonna hawk them on the street at Austin Pride, and then I got swept into the Red Cross, and it's like Disneyland. Pins are a commodity, and by total coincidence, I was rich. So I gave them out, and I'll give everybody one here as well today who would like one to wear on their, it's not the official Red Cross one, it's one of my collection, but I started over 300 conversations on trans and non-binary identity with Red Crossers across the country.
Thank you. Don't, yeah.
Can I ask, so Hannah, you deployed 4 times, was it?
3.5 if you count Dorian.
So, what kind of a grade do you give the Red Cross when it comes to diversity and inclusion? In those responses, have you had any big challenges of transgender?
Not that we're trying to measure ourselves against other things.
I'm not.
Ranking isn't important to you, but what's our grade?
But I guess the question is.
There's always room for improvement. There's always room for improvement. I highlighted a few of the questions that we're going to have to ask as an organization moving forward. It's how much do we want to lead by example to leverage our, as I said, size and impact and presence in this country to be a force for the kinds of change that we want to see. And again, that can be done in terms of ideals and not in terms of specific policy or candidates, obviously. So I think there's lots of room for growth. I think I was positively impressed, or I wouldn't have hung around as long as I did, that there were so many opportunities and so many opportunities to just try new things. Like if I'd stayed in Houston one more day, I would have gotten forklift training. But it got rescheduled and I couldn't stay for it. And it's about wearing all different kinds of hats and finding the one that fits, and I love that this organization is giving people a chance to do that, and I hope, like I said, to make it a career. So if you're looking for the right person, like I said, have this really awesome Etsy shop that I run. I do this around the country, but I'm always looking to take on a new challenge.
We need an Etsy branch.
Just one quick thing, and all my colleagues are saying, oh my God, what's Richard gonna say now? You are very funny.
Yes.
You are very engaging. And this is a lot of information and a lot of great information for us, so it's a heavy, meaningful message. But in between all of that, you are exceptionally engaging and entertaining in your presentation. Thank you for that, because it allows people to assimilate with that. And if you're looking at career advancement, in addition to selling pins, you can do CDs on the side.
Well, it's time to look under your seats now and find out who's trans.
Thank you so much. And you're gonna hang around all day today?
Yes, I'll be here all day. Thank you
You know,
so
that's
much.
good. You guys are next, right? Am I right? About the agenda. Do you need setup time?
You can take like 5 minutes.
Oh, should it, yeah, how about a little 5-minute break, everyone?
All right, 5 minutes, and then I'll